Let's take a look inside Mr. Gibson's public speaking classroom.
Good day, public speakers. Welcome to Teacher Apartment Studios. We are still number 2, 10 years running. There are a few goals that I'd like you to have and think about as we move on throughout this course. And there's language that I'm going to introduce you to as it pertains to those goals that you are going to hear throughout the semester. So in that regards, I hope that you'll pay attention. And maybe it's something that you'll take moving forward beyond the class. Think about this. You find yourself in an interview and you are overcome with nerves. You're less likely to be loose. You're less likely to give the answers that might feel right to you on the inside, but you're second guessing yourself. Some of you might say that you've joined this class just for practice. I know some of you might say because you have to. But your ultimate public speaking goal, what you should know, what you should write down, is that you should be attempting to be your authentic self. The ultimate drive of this course is to push you to be comfortable in front of your classmates, to embrace your idiosyncrasies and your original ideas despite whatever misgivings that you may have had. Perhaps people have communicated to you things that are inaccurate about yourself. And it's time to start embracing your authentic self. So let's go public speaking class. This class is divided into a couple of major chunks, if you will. Chunk 1, Piece 1, writing. And so you should have a writing goal too. And what I'd like you to put down in your notes is your writing goal: to stimulate an emotional response. Okay? Your writing goal is to stimulate an emotional response. Whoever tells the best story wins is the textbook that I used in my graduate level speaking course. And it makes sense. I love the title because it's true. Only one person gets the job. Life is a competition. There are limited resources. And so you should be focused on making sure that your story is relatable. Your story strikes a chord with your audience. And I wanted to present you here, especially with these goals, with some evidence. So a passage from Whoever Tells the Best Story Wins. Your goal is to tell a story that feels enough like a real experience that it stimulates an emotional response. And when you see the GIF and you're looking at Oprah, you're thinking, do I need to make people cry? And I would say no. There's a multitude of emotional responses that you could be attempting to stimulate, and it really varies upon your message. And this is something that we're going to come back to. So the idea of eliciting an emotional response or stimulating an emotional response are definitely things that you're going to hear again. I don't think it's possible to influence someone else's personal feelings if you aren't willing to share your own personal feelings. Your storytelling abilities will be directly related to your willingness to reveal your own personal interpretation of events that have shaped your own emotional reasoning. You've already got to see that if you watched Chang, or you watched The Magician that talked about performing magic for a couple that came into the restaurant, and he didn't realize that one of the patrons was blind, and so he was caught off guard. And in that moment, he was willing to share perhaps, a fumbling or, a foible, if you will. You are going to be telling stories from your life throughout the semester. Stories, of course, with which you choose. There's going to be different criteria that you will be attempting to meet, but you will choose those stories. And it is in your willingness and or the requirement that you share those stories that you really be able to develop connections with other people. And this becomes especially important when you find yourself in a room full of people who have no idea who you are, and they ask you to tell us a time when you did something great. Right? Tell us a particular flaw that you might have that you're working on. And how do you answer those questions? How do you answer those with confidence, but yet give them something that is real? To give them a legitimate story versus just speaking about it in generalities and or trying to dodge or avoid the question. So from another source, Pixar in a Box, Intro to Storytelling. Why write about what you know? Well, it's because it's probably what happened to you that made you feel in a particular way. And what you're really trying to do when you tell a story is to get that audience to have the same feeling. You're recalling a feeling that you've experienced, and the way in which you tell the story, you express yourself non-verbally and with your tone, is an attempt to try to get that audience to have the same feeling, right? It's almost same information, different source. And 3 seems to be the magic number. I overheard an interview from a very popular YouTube channel, Soft White Underbelly, and in that interview, Chuck Palahniuk was interviewed. He's the author of Fight Club and other famous novels. Fight Club made into a movie. So here is the quote. When you're able to articulate your experience, you give other people the opportunity to recognize their experience is not so crazy or silly that they can't talk about it themselves. You give them a permission, you give them an authority by doing so first. I'm recalling something that a student said to me that maybe, she meant it quite literally, but she said that she felt more comfortable in the course as time went on because I was willing to do embarrassing things. Now, I did not consider what I was doing to be embarrassing, but I understood what she meant. And my hope would be that although that may not work for everybody, it seemed to have worked for her, and I hope that it works for some of you, which is why I engage in all of this stuff with you. Right? Well, why do I fall on the floor and act a fool? And my hope is that it gives you a sense of comfortability to be open yourself. And what I'm going to show you now is a clip from Dave Chappelle accepting the Mark Twain Award. Once a year, whoever it is that makes the decisions, right? They've decided this particular comedian, humorist, is worthy, only one, right, per year. And so Dave Chappelle is going to accept the award. And I had picked a selection of his awards acceptance speech where he is thanking his mother. For 2.5 minutes, Dave Chappelle is going to thank his mother. And over the course of that 2.5 minutes, what I would call a story about his mother, he's going to elicit multiple emotional responses. I'm going to play the clip for you, and then I'm going to ask you to recall some things. And of course, if you were feeling so diligent, you could go back and watch it yourself again.
The other real special shout out I got to make, because none of this would have been possible on any level without this person, is my mother. Mom. My mother. Mom. You have no idea what I put this woman through. If you had just given birth to me, that would have been more than enough. But the fact that she raised me and raised me well, we had a real oral tradition in our house. I knew the word griot when I was a little boy. A griot was a person in Africa who was charged with keeping the stories of the village. Everyone would tell a griot the stories, and they would remember them all so that they could tell future generations. And when they got old, they'd tell them to someone else. And they say in Africa, when a griot dies, it's like a library was burnt down. And my mother used to tell me, before I ever thought about doing comedy, she said, you should be a griot. And she'd fill me with every story of black life. You know, she's educated in African American studies, and she would let me understand the context that I was being raised in, that I'm being raised in a hostile environment that I have to tame. By the time I was 14 years old, I was in nightclubs, mastering an adult world. It was terrifying. The crack epidemic was going on, and my mother would hear gunshots outside and be scared to death. Maybe it's my son. But early in my career, if you remember, Mom, you used to sit in the club with me. She'd do a full day of work. You'd be back there falling asleep, just waiting for me to go on. She would watch my show every night. Do you know how long that car ride is home? How many of you have ever heard your mother say, jokes were a little too much tonight, son? I was a soft kid. I was sensitive, I'd cry easy, and I would be scared to fist fight. And my mother used to tell me this thing, I don't even know if you remember, but you said this to me more than once. You said, son, sometimes you have to be a lion so you can be the lamb you really are. I talk this like a lion. I'm not afraid of any of you. When it comes word to word, I will gab with the best of them, just so I can chill and be me. And that's why I love my art form, because I understand every practitioner of it. Whether I agree with them or not, I know where they're coming from. They want to be heard. They got something to say. There's something they notice. They just want to be understood. Love this genre. It saved my life.
So some things that I'd like you to note from the clip. Dave Chappelle says, "Thanks, Mom," and everybody starts clapping. Okay? That emotional response doesn't count, if we're going to call that, right, the ovation, which is like, yeah, Mom, okay? That's practically an obligatory applause break. But as Dave Chappelle goes on, he tells a very specific story. And if you were in the room, I'd ask you, what did his mother study? What was happening when he was growing up? And you can answer those questions for me very specifically, because he gives you the specifics. He starts to paint a picture that seems very real. I mean, it was real, but again, those specifics help it become real to the audience. And at the point, the story becomes very overwhelming when he starts, his mom worked long hours, and he's very specific about what those hours looked like. And then she would go, after working all those hours, she would go and watch him perform stand-up comedy as a young teen every night. And with the emphasis that he tells it and the specificity with which he tells that story, the audience is overcome with emotion. They're like, wow, that is really impressive. It sounds very impressive. And so now an applause break happens. That applause break was not obligatory, if you will. It was one that was created through the story and through the emphasis with which he told the story. Right after that happens, he says, how many of you have ever heard your mom say your beep? You insert the beep. Jokes were a little bit too much tonight. Now, it's that very specific dialogue that I'd like you to note. That's, if you're looking for ways in which you can tell stories better, be specific with your dialogue. Okay, certainly I would hope that, you probably never had anybody say that to you. And the reason that gets a laugh is because of the surprise factor. Nobody really expected that he was going to say, right? He even said, how many of you ever had that happen? And people were like, yeah, that's ludicrous. Right? I've never imagined that my mother would say something like that to me. And so it generates a response. Now, as Dave Chappelle continues on, he talks about being bullied. He's very vulnerable. He's revealing his emotions about what it was like to grow up. If you wonder why he's big and bulky now, maybe that's also in response to the pain of him being bullied when he was younger. And he quotes his mom again, right? His mom tells him a very specific phrase, and he cites the specific phrase, right? You have to be a lion in order for you to be the lamb that you really are. And if you turn up the volume loud enough, you can hear the audience make an "aww" noise, because that is a very touching thing for a mother to say, to try to comfort her son when he comes home and says, well, you know, life is hard, I'm going to school and being bullied. Again, the audience is on an emotional roller coaster ride. And he begins to talk about freedom of speech and what it means to him and what it means to comics and whether he agrees with you or not. He values free speech. Sarah Silverman up in the corner is overcome with emotions because herself being a comedian and also valuing free speech and definitely pushing the boundaries of it herself, starts to cry. In 2.5 minutes, right? This is why, whether you like Chappelle as a comedian or not, right? Whether you think he's a jerk or whether you think he's hilarious. This is why you have to value that particular story. You have to, use it as a model, if you will. Use some of Steve Jobs' writing as a model because he takes people on the ride. It starts with setting the scene. And then, people are in awe, in admiration of his mother. So it gets an applause break. People are like, oh man, your mom is amazing. And then he says something specific about what his mom says, and they laugh. And then as he goes on and is vulnerable and talks about his life experiences and something that his mother said to comfort him, people go, oh, he gets an awe. And he even has people in the audience crying over the course of 2.5 minutes of talking about his mother. Now, I don't necessarily expect you to get to that place, but I think that if you push yourself and if you really think about some of the things that we've already talked about, right? Some of the things that we talked about with the Steve Jobs speech, some of your life experiences, I think that you can elicit emotional responses from your audience as well. And it's going to be something you're going to be practicing and asked to do all semester long. So your writing goal, check. Right? So here's something else that you should put very specifically in your class notes. You have a delivery goal. Your ultimate delivery goal. Create a congruent message. Create a congruent message. And here comes the quote. Right? But right again, for the sake of you being brief in your notes, right? Extend as you so may desire and or not. But in all endeavors, you should be trying to create a congruent message, congruent communication, when the tone, the words, and the body language are completely aligned behind that message. Now, we haven't really cracked or done even a surface level dive into delivery yet, but it doesn't hurt for you to be thinking about that now. Some of you might have told me that Steve Jobs could have varied his tone, and perhaps Steve Jobs should have thought about moments in which he should have slowed down and or perhaps been more expressive with the emotions that he felt, perhaps maybe when he was fired or when he had his near-death experience. And maybe in those moments his message was not congruent. Right? You should be focusing, what do your words say? What does your tone and your body language say? Why do we find sarcasm so fascinating? Because sarcasm is absolutely an incongruent message. It's not congruent, I say hello to you and you're like, hey, Gibson, how's it going, right? I say, hello! And what I'm really saying is wake up. But there's an incongruence in the words versus perhaps the tone, right? And the reason, again, there's only a few reasons ultimately from a psychological perspective why we laugh. One of them is incongruence. So hence why sarcasm has some value as far as laughing is concerned. People laugh because you say it one way, but your tone is saying something completely else. I'd like you to think, if you are going to tell a story about a struggle, what might a struggle sound like? And if you're going to tell a story about a triumph, what might it sound like in that moment? We will absolutely be coming back to congruent messages. When we start to talk about delivery as a unit, we're going to start by touching again on congruent messages and talking about all of the specific tone and things that you could be doing with your body to make sure that your message is congruent. There's an exercise with congruent messages. So really right now, I'd like you to have that language in your notes. I'd like you to be thinking about that, and maybe you're looking it up, and just start that process of thinking about it now. Right? Be your authentic self. That's your ultimate goal. Elicit emotional responses. That's your writing goal. And when you are thinking about delivery, before you actually start to, I don't want to say read the words, but before you start to present the words, be thinking about the physicality, the tonality, and the body language that might match the words that you have written, the words that you're going to present, and create that congruent message. For now, that's all. Oh my God, that's it.